Hey, I'm Cameron Batagler with Super Simple Data. Today I wanted to talk to you about data lakes and specifically data lake zones and like the different containers. It gets a little confusing because there's a bunch of different ways it can work and there's a bunch of different methodologies and they're really pushed into like specific products. It's frustrating. So I just wanted to go through it today, talk about it, see if we can help you figure out how you can use it and maybe even use it without data lakes. So let's get into it. Hey, so let's talk about where it is now, right? Currently, that I work with anyway, I see the two big ones, right? You have the more confusing and I won't say generic, but confusing, but probably trademarked medallion concept that Databricks has. And then you have the more hyper generic cloud adoption framework, data zone or data lake zones methodology from Microsoft that gets put in Azure. Those are the two I work with. There's a bunch of others, but they all come down to the same base level. From a Databricks perspective, if you haven't seen it before, I'll show the picture here. But what you'll see is three zones: bronze, silver, gold. Bronze is supposed to be your raw layer. Silver is supposed to be your enriched layer, and gold is supposed to be your production layer. And then if you look at the Microsoft one, I'll pop up, I think it's a table. I'll put that up. You'll see it in front of my face right now as I'm talking. That one becomes a little more, what is that, generic, where you have raw, conformed, enriched, and then like sandbox, and then just the synapse spot. There's like 5 spots there, but they all come down to the same base concepts, and this is the important part from my perspective: raw, enriched, production. What else could we call those? Raw, conformed production, raw, I don't know, aggregated production. There's a bunch of different things you can call it. It's whatever works for you. It's whatever really fits within your system. Let's define this a little bit though. If we're talking about raw, what does that mean? That means taking your data directly from the source system, putting it into a file format that is as close to source as possible. So like if you're taking a SQL table, moving it to like a CSV output or a Parquet output, something that keeps it close. Or if you're getting CSV files, you're just moving the CSV with zero formatting into that raw zone. No major controls on it, no masking, nothing, just raw. The very important point about raw is no human should ever touch it. No one. Like, it should be 100% automated processes that are going into the raw zone. And also with that raw zone, in theory, you should be able to rebuild all the other areas in this just from what's sitting in raw. So it becomes very important, but shouldn't actually be touched by a human. Next in that is your enriched zone. I personally prefer to put a conformed zone in the middle. Conformed in this situation just means everyone's running the same basic format. Usually in our current architectures, it's like Parquet, right? So something where you take all your CSV files, your Parquet files, your random pipe delimited file and your tab delimited file and all these other things, and you put them all into tabular Parquet files so you can actually keep track of what's where, make sure you're not having to fight like, oh, this one has headers, this one doesn't. We don't want to deal with that. So I usually like to have raw, then a conformed space. Now, enriched gets interesting. Usually what I consider enriched is data that people can start touching and working with because it has had security masking enabled. So like PII data starts to get masked out. Your data that needs to have some level of extra conformance added to it, like X number of decimal points, things like that. All of that starts to get built in and based on your data governance definitions. And also you start bringing in all these other sources because you have your raw data, right? But sometimes you want, the example everyone uses is like weather data, right? But other sources, non-business systems, and even some business systems that maybe you don't own or like, it's where you bring all of this together and start building out the individual relationships. This is usually where you start switching file formats into something like a Delta format, or start utilizing like Spark tables, depending on what system you're using. And then your final production data, that's your true aggregated and conformed and business ready data. This is where if you were going to build a report, you would point at this data set, and that's kind of the gold standard or the source of truth, whatever you want to call it. It's the end result of all the other work. I usually also like to break off what is traditionally called a sandbox layer. This one, think of taking your enriched layer, right? The data that you've prepared, you're ready to go, you're ready to start building out larger aggregations and like the actual business intelligence, but you fully anonymize it, make it something that is much more security centric, and you can give access to more people to. That sandbox starts to allow the data democratization. Fun word, right? Everybody likes to say it, buzzword of the week. It lets you take that concept and start leaning into it. You can say, hey, you want that report, or you want this specific machine learning model, or you want this concept from our data, go for it. Here's access to the sandbox. Start digging in. And that can really produce some cool results. And also, once they build that report, say it's something that a bunch of people would get some genuine value from, make it a production side. Move their process, make it productionalized, and have it be something that goes into your production layer. Digging into that a bit further now. You don't need a data lake to use these data lake zone concepts. I think that's one of the hugest misnomers of keep calling them data lake zones. No, they're data zones. You can call them whatever you want. You can utilize them however you want, but start building your data pipeline process with these zone concepts in mind. And most people that are doing this flavor of data engineering, they're already doing this, right? You're already doing this. You have a ingestion area, you have staging tables, and you have production tables just in your traditional, data warehouse. You have your files that you pull together, you have the staging tables that you have in your SQL database, and then you do a bunch of stored procs or SSIS jobs or who knows what, and now you have your production tables. Sounds like you have 3 zones already of raw, conformed, or enriched, and production. So, from a true complexity standpoint, it's no different than what most people do now, but the added concept of a data lake or a new built-in concept there, it makes it more difficult than it actually is. So what I'd have a lot of people do when I'm working with them, or what I'd have you do, is go check how you're moving your data around now, with or without a modern data estate, with or without data lakes, delta lakes, or whatever swamp lake puddle you have at the moment. Go look at your data processing environment and try to start building little silos around the stages and steps that you have, and utilize that to then modernize or plan for your next steps. So just say it again. Take your file share, right, that you're using to get all of your random production data loads, your staging tables, and your production tables. Start calling those your raw zone, your enriched zone, or your conformed zone, and your production zone. Start using that terminology now so that it becomes easier to move parts of this. Now, I think a huge part of this too, in calling them data lake zones that we completely miss, is not every zone has to be in a data lake. Like, I run into this quite a bit of, well, why would I have 3 data lake zones and then like Synapse dedicated pool is the one that always comes up, right? Why would I have your production data lake zone and then your production data in a Synapse pool, or, in a being reported on in Power BI, or what, there's like all these different questions there. There's no reason that any one of these zones can't be a totally different technology. Like, you can have a raw data lake zone, a conformed staging tables in a SQL database, and a totally separate SQL Synapse dedicated pool that is your production data, like your true end user source of truth. You can mix and match within that. Just define it. Like, build it with your needs in mind, define them across what they do, why they do it, and what you need, and you'll have a much more useful for you product and concept, and be able to move individual parts of this in the future if you want to. Because you can move any one of these zones one at a time if you want to. Obviously, it comes with some detriment of you're moving data around, you're trying to figure out different things of like, oh, why is it here? What's it here? What benefit does this have? But there's no reason you can't. Like, you don't have to focus on just the data lake. You don't have to just focus on the SQL server or the data warehouse. You can mix, match, build what works for you, and have a genuinely useful concept and data estate. You should always have the sandbox in the data lake, though. I don't know what it is. Data scientists, they absolutely love Parquet files for some reason, and so you just give them the sandbox. That's all there is to it. With all I've talked about today, it's an awful lot. I hope, though, that I simplified the data zone, the data lake zone concept, and made it something actually useful for you. If you have any questions about how you could use it, how you should use it, how you want to use it if it's right, most of the time the answer is yes, but throw it in the comments. I love answering these questions. I love having discussions about different ways to do this and different things you can do to make this better for yourself. So please comment below. I will put links also for the Databricks medallion architecture and the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework Data Lake Zone architectures. Check those out, and as always, hope to hear from you soon. So, God, I need to stop starting with so. Let's try that again.